Welcome to Empowered Through Compassion podcast. If you are interested in the intersection of trauma healing, compassion, and personal transformation, this is the right place for you. Join me, David, and my wife, Heather, along with other clinicians, trainers, authors, and leaders in this evolving world of trauma healing. Through compassionate conversation, we look at powerful therapeutic approaches such as internal family systems, IFS, EMDR, and motivational interviewing to see how they can lead us to deep and lasting healing. Please join our Lunch, Learn, and Live Stream, a free opportunity to connect with the ETC community. These are held on the second Tuesday of every month at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. For the next 4 months, we will speak with a panel of authors from the newly released book, IFS Informed EMDR, Creative and Collaborative Approaches. Check out the ETC website, empoweredthroughcompassion.com, and click on live stream to see our guests and to register for each event. Please remember that this podcast is not a substitute for therapy. If you are seeking support for your own healing, I encourage you to reach out to a trained professional. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Empowered Through Compassion. Welcome back. If you've been here before, it's so nice for you to be here. I feel really lucky to have you here, and I feel very lucky because I have a very, very special guest who I am super excited to be talking with. Let me share a little bit. Her name is Soraya Chemaly. She is an award-winning writer and activist whose work focuses on the role of gender in culture, politics, religion, and media. She's director of the Women's Media Center Speech Project and an advocate for women's freedom of expression and expanded civic and political engagement. She's a prolific writer and speaker. Her books, she has a lot. There was one entitled Rage Becomes Her, and there's a new one, The Resilience Myth, which I want to dive into today. Soraya, welcome. It's so nice to have you here,
Thank
and
you
I'm
for having me,
excited.
David. I'm excited too. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Great, good. So just before I press record, you were saying something which I was like, "Oh, this is good. Let's capture this."
Right up front in the book, I say what I'm writing about is resilience as part of ideology. Not My book is not about resilience as an internal trait that you're going to cultivate or a skill that you're going to develop. That, like, on page one, I'm like, that's not happening here. Just fair warning, you know. But I think that resilience as an idea, it's just exploded since 9/11, especially, right? It's sort of 9/11 dovetailed with positive psychology, and the two together created an atmosphere that I think genuinely helped people recover from the shock of 9/11, right? But then we just took the idea, ran through the goalposts, and it now almost means nothing because it's such a broad concept. It's applied everywhere. You hear about resilience in corporate programming, in the military, in athletics, in schools, in personal therapy. Like, it's got so many different meanings, it's very hard to pin one down. And so the book really breaks down these myths of resilience to say we have this ideal of resilience that I do think clearly in the book, I clearly articulate it. You said sort of white supremacist culture. I would say a white male supremacist culture, right?
Fair.
Which is super
Yeah.
hard because we're only now gaining fluency with saying white supremacism, right? I think even as a writer 10 years ago, when I would write that, editors would take it out. It made people too uncomfortable. It made them too uncomfortable, right? But in fact, it's not just a white supremacist culture. It's a white male supremacist culture.
Yeah.
And those things reinforce each other over and over and over, including in our ideals of resilience, which are hyper masculinized, super Western in their orientation. And in the end, what I'm saying is that they end up facilitating the brutalization of entire populations and bodies and communities. because it focuses on this idea that's ultimately just a tired bootstrapping ideal. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get tougher.
You mentioned, I've heard you mention that, and I completely agree. And I think it's the bootstrap idea. I think it's colonialism. I think
Yes,
it's this whole like individual kind of
individualism.
mentality.
Right,
Individualism, yes.
right. And in fact, I mean, you've done so much of this work, but I don't know how you deny the fact that resilience is relational, that we draw our resilience from,
100%.
right, from having caring connections, mutual care, feelings of belonging, meaning that we share. You can't have the self-sufficiency, the optimism, the grit without those things, but we never seem to get to the root of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, unconscious or subconscious
Mm-hmm.
ideals that have been placed in us within the society. My own belief of resilience has to do with attachment and
Mm-hmm.
community, and also with flexibility.
Yes, cognitive
Almost like that Bruce
flexibility.
Lee, like water,
Mm-hmm.
right? That speed
Openness.
of recovery and is in terms of you get hit. If you're hard, if you're the rugged individual, you're going to
Right,
get bent and hurt, and you're never going to heal.
right.
If you're like water,
Mm-hmm.
that to me is
That's
strength.
right. That's right. And I think what's interesting is our language and our thinking around resilience implies that we have these solid, again, not fluid identities, and that
Yep.
and that while our circumstances have changed, we don't change. But in fact, to be resilient, you have to accept that you have changed. Your relationship to the world or to other people, to your sense of self or to your ambitions, that's what's changing. And if you don't have the cognitive flexibility to run with that, it's much harder. If you're sort of clinging, which ends up, I think, in grief, you feel lost, you feel grief, because to lose yourself in a way, to change might be sad.
Oh, you're bringing up so much inside because yeah, it's I feel like with Buddhist philosophy, and I'm a novice at best with that, it's all about the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're really able to tap into the present moment, then there's this also simultaneous recognition that the present moment is not static.
Mm-hmm.
There's always movement, there's always
Mm-hmm.
change in some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
However it changes. And I'm not going to put like a label on good or bad, but
Mm-hmm.
there's always this kind of movement within
Right.
the present moment. You can't like capture it because it's gone as soon as you
That's
try
right.
to. And even just our society, right? Like, I don't know about you. I'll be personal here. I'm from New York,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a big Broadway fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took our family, our daughter. Well, no, I think it might have just been my wife and I. We were lucky, and we were able to see Hamilton. And then, of
Oh
course, it came
yes,
on
so
the
great.
Disney Channel. So then we are
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, let's all watch the Hamilton. And what is America? In my understanding, based off of that, is it was really just an experiment, right? It was an
It
experiment to see.
continues to be
It continues,
it
but
continues to be an
we
experiment.
have a lot of people, and again, I don't want to be cruel to anybody out there. I think there's a mentality that it needs to be static or it needs to go back in time,
I mean,
capture
clearly,
some
right.
ideal moment of this, and it's losing the fact that we're evolving and continue to evolve. Let's not go backwards. Let's envision what the future is going to look like.
Right. I think it's interesting. I, I do write about this a lot in the book. I write about what motive the fear and what it means to have authoritarian mindsets and
Mm,
how resilience is used to cultivate people into fascist movements.
I
Yeah,
never.
fear and contempt, but there's quite an explicit call in this country on the radical right to be resilient in many different ways. And they use the word resilience over and over again. And it's this very distorted ideologues resilience, right?
Mm.
And yeah, I think those connections are quite explicit and worth exploring.
I think what you're saying and what you're writing about feels very important.
Um,
And
yeah, I mean it's hard. We're just at a hard time. The other thing too that I think is interesting when you're talking about like Buddhism and the idea of now, right? I spent a lot of time. Actually removed an entire chapter that I loved on the notion of time, because in fact, our sense of self is inextricable from our experience of time, right? Our selfhood is constructed out of time, out of the experience of time. So when we face threats or challenges, our our sense of time is distorted, right? Like in a car accident, we know that time feels different, or we experience time differently if we're gaming, or we have different experiences. So time itself, the experience of time, is constantly fluctuating for us.
Yeah.
And what I say in the book is we live in this accelerated culture, and one of the goals is to be resilient, which means being quote unquote normal, or quote unquote bouncing back as fast as possible. But in fact, healing doesn't go fast usually. It takes time, and it's also not linear. You might take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. You might grieve for a long time, feel better, and then grieve again. And so we have to build compassion, self-compassion, understanding into how we are into our resilience expectations in ways that keeps falling away. Like increasingly, the idea is that you should learn the skills to bounce back. Also an impossibility. Nobody bounces back. We never go back to a prior state, right? And in fact, bouncing back is an argument for the future. It's not about the past. You can't go to the past. You're actually saying, I want a future that is stable, that feels comfortable, where I feel safe, which doesn't necessarily mean life is going to be the way it was before, But the essential part in this part of our conversation, I think, is this notion of speed, doing it fast. And one of the ways that we're supposed to show we're doing it fast is to be as productive as possible, to get back to work, to function in our roles.
Yeah. Well, let
And
me throw this in, and this is going to blow up, I think, into many, many
mhm,
directions in your beautiful mind and my beautiful mind. Um, I agree with you, and I had a lot of thoughts about time, and I love how you're
mhm,
saying like the nonlinearness of it. And then my mind was also thinking about there's also when we really are being tuned into time,
mhm.
or trauma, I think plays into
Yeah,
this conversation as well. Um, there's an element of us not being in control of it. And I
absolutely.
think when they're weaponizing resiliency or
Yeah,
whatever, there's this feeling of like, I need to be in control. I need to bounce back
100%.
quickly, but it needs
Yes,
to be on my time frame. And it's
yes,
and in that we lose the fact that you're trying to control this
right,
thing that you can't control. Even
right,
with grief, that's an animal in and of itself. And
right.
we could allow ourselves to be changed through grief in a really profound way, but it's by giving up that control that we do that.
So, that's super interesting. Um, I'm pretty critical of certain aspects of positive psychology because of the way it's been popularized in self-help, right? I think positive psychologists who are researchers and really trying hard, they come up with incredible insights, but once those insights leave them, anything can happen, right? So this is the danger. This is why understanding the culture and the media are so important. So if you take the idea of learned optimism, very important to understanding depression, but when it leaves that context, people think, oh, I can learn to be optimistic and that will solve my problems, which is not really what learned optimism is about ultimately, I don't think. But
No.
the operative factor in learned optimism, I think, is control. It's not actually feeling positive, right? It is
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
person's sense of agency and control.
Well, let me add this, and I don't know if this is part of positive psychology or if this is the misrepresentation of it in a broader context. But when you start using positive psychology to then negate other emotions
Yes,
and call them bad and control them,
that's right.
personally, I have a problem with that. I
I think
think
that's
that
really
causes a lot of
damaging.
suffering.
Totally. And
It's damaging.
very,
Exactly.
and it causes suffering and also imposes suffering on others because of this demand. It's almost I think about this a lot in terms of intimate partner violence and sexual violence. When someone is experiencing this and they need help, or they say something, and very often a response to that is, "But you're resilient, you're strong, you're optimistic, you can change that person, do it for the children." Like there's all of this encouragement to actually stick with the abuse ultimately, and
Yeah.
it endangers
Yeah.
people, and it makes them feel isolated, because here they are, they've made an attempt to say, "I'm in this terrible situation, maybe can you talk to me or help me?" And the response shuts that door by saying, "It's you're resilient, you can do this," which is not particularly helpful.
No, it's destructive.
It's
If
right.
used in that way, it's destructive. I think, and again, you're so right, where we say certain things, and even in the field, which is not perfect at all, but we say certain things with one intent.
Yeah.
But what is that? How does that intent carry into different people in different
Right.
places? I love the concept out of DBT
Mm-hmm.
of radical acceptance.
Mm-hmm. That's
And in
right.
my mind, radical acceptance is we really radically accept what is happening in that moment. I'm getting
Mm-hmm.
punched in the face. I'm going to radically accept that that hurts, that this
Right.
is not comfortable. That doesn't mean that I'm going to accept it. That
Right.
and this is where it gets tricky,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't mean I'm going to stand there and let somebody keep punching me in the face,
But
or that
that's
I
what's
don't want
happening.
repercussions, or I don't want to find a way to stop it and make sure it doesn't happen again to myself or to somebody else. It means I'm radically accepting that I'm not going to turn away from it. I'm going to
Right.
radically accept it so that I can deal with the
I'm
situation.
not going to ignore it or be falsely positive, or yeah.
Yeah.
Think about COVID. Like, I write a lot about Trump's response to COVID and his incredibly dangerous optimism, just delusional. I watched it again today. I watched the clip. There was a clip, a whole series made, where he's basically saying it's just going to go away. Poof.
Well, he got half of
It's
the
a
people in the
miracle.
White House sick, right? Just
Uh,
because of his refusal to wear a
yeah,
mask.
but just public policy, science, vaccines, the CDC. Like, things are true in the world, even if we struggle to understand what they are these days. But he's a real disciple of Norman Vincent Peale, and Peale's power of positive thinking has had a very long tail in our culture, and he's the prototypical example of how that can distort risk perception, how it can distort taking the kinds of steps we really need to take in order to adapt and thrive well.
Yeah. See, I think if they would be able, both him and Norman, to really understand, at least my perception of radical acceptance, they might be able to see, some of the errors of how, I don't think positive thinking works if that then, feeds into a fantasy world that's been constructed
Right.
with it.
Or
Because that's just
denial.
going or denial, right? Well, and there's a real purpose for it. Let's not deny that the denial is great and wonderful if you have a lot of power and your
Right.
purpose is to keep that power and you're
That's
getting the
right.
power from the subjugation of other people,
Right.
then there's a definite benefit from it. I'm curious what you think of, and these are all concepts which I love talking with you because they go on in my head and
Yeah.
they hurt. Um, but this whole thought of like, when we're dealing with Trump and the society that's now caused it, how has this capitalistic, white supremacist energy within our society interrelated with malignant narcissism?
Mm.
And somehow it's, in my mind, allowed fertile ground for us
Hmm.
to see this disorder as something positive. And it's like, how did that happen?
Yeah, that's a real distortion. That I have to think about for a while. It's interesting because, in fact, I've read. Well, I want to go back to one thing before we can get to that, because they're related. I was really interested to see what world was Norman Vincent Peale experiencing when he wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. And even though he did it in 1952, this book has never been out of print. It's one of the world's best-selling ongoing books. It's insane, right? It's filled with these platitudes and aphorisms about looking forward and um, being optimistic and taking control, like all of the things we've been talking about. But in 1952, this was such a remarkably, it was a turning point for global society. It was, there were decolonial rebellions, there was growing awareness of the Holocaust, there was the creation of the birth control pill, there was desegregation in American schools, there was the women's movement, the civil rights movement. There was just
You're
this
kind of blowing my mind, and I'm going to show my ignorance for history. I didn't realize that all started so early. I thought that was more
1950.
the 60s,
It was
70s.
no, you have to really like that period between 1952 and 1954 is I could write I would love to write a whole book about that period, right? But the reason I say that is because it was such a rude confrontation of white male techno power because we had World War II was over, we
Mhm.
were saviors, we were perceived and we were projecting that idea, and yet here was a world rejecting so much of that. Women wanted their control over their bodies. Colonized people were rejecting. They're like, out, get out, get out. You've hurt us. We need you to be out. It was a direct assault on European white male supremacy. And yet here he is coming up with a philosophy that says, don't look back, look forward. We're the owners of progress. We are the keepers of progress. We are we can do this. And that idea has really carried through. I think it's also carried through in the identities of a lot of powerful white men. So when you see men like Elon Musk saying he's going to go colonize space, it's part of that ideology.
And I love what you're saying. I think there's a lot of wisdom to it, and I don't disagree with it at all. I feel like he, like Trump and like others, Elon Musk, they're riding on waves of this really distorted kind of thinking and power from way before them. And
Yeah.
when I was thinking about that book, which was very, very pivotal, I'm going back to like Descartes,
Oh,
and
100%.
Darwinism and
100%.
all of those ways
Yes.
of thinking that just were like almost like a little bit of a cancer that
Yeah,
just
because
started
they're
spreading within our
hierarchical, they
society.
silo everything, they have taxonomies of people and nature and just this radical separation and disconnection as opposed to connection and interdependence. Like those philosophies just sever, 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 sever. They sever us
All
mind,
right.
body.
Could I say something that's probably going to end me up in hell one day? Um, I was reading this book, which is a beautiful book. I think it's The Smell of Sweetgrass.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Braiding
braiding
Sweetgrass.
sweetgrass. Robin Wall Kilmer.
Yeah, what a beautiful book. And
Yes.
she talks about the mythology within the
Mm-hmm.
culture, even going back to the Bible, and
Mm-hmm.
how within her culture, there was
Yes.
a very different relationship with nature, where here you
Absolutely.
had nature that was giving of
Right.
her own free will and abundance, a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the mythology that was created in the Judeo-Christian belief?
Yeah.
And again, it's not to knock the beautiful spirituality within that, and there is this sense of like, well, that original myth is you need to be excommunicated from this garden. And in order to work your way back, it's work, it's toil. There's like an adversary relationship almost created between nature and man and having to
and
subdue
and it
nature.
is nature and man because in that equation women are particularly punished, right? In
Women are nature, Mother Earth.
Yes, but they're particularly punished as transgressors who took the fruit, and are
That's
punished
true.
in labor. I mean, it's a very misogynistic origin story, right? Not only does it sever us from nature, but it it definitely identifies women as the root cause of the disconnect, you know? And that carries through, as you say, with the conflation of nature and femininity and the control that men are supposed to exercise over both women and nature. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's really salient. But to come full circle, the reason I mentioned Elon Musk and this kind of domination ethos, domination of women, domination of nature, is because you can see in malignant narcissism and also in sociopathy gendered aspects of those things. And so there are a lot of studies that are like, well, are these particularly, like, how do the characteristics of narcissism and sociopathy, why do they dovetail more closely to masculine ideals, to masculine norms, to masculine
Mm.
behavior? And I think that's worth worth investigating. you
Well,
know
and I feel like, okay, I'm going to bring in some IFS here.
mm-hmm.
So IFS talks about a lot of terms, which I feel has a beautiful language and beautiful way of seeing it. And one of those things that it talks about within ourselves is polarities
Mm-hmm.
that happen and how,
Mm-hmm.
polarities, my understanding of IFS is that polarities are really one of the biggest things that cause our system anxiety and to feel bad and so within this culture, I think we become almost masters at creating this polarity. And you've talked about how there's more similarity between male and
Oh
female
yes,
attributes and
absolutely.
within ourselves even. I
Yes,
think a man and a female, both of us, we have masculine energy and
that's
we
right.
have feminine energy. And
That's right.
this belief that we have to somehow separate them and they're
Right.
at odds with each other is really a fabrication of
It's
society.
totally, fabrication is totally corrosive. It's kind of the ordinal othering, right? To other yourself, to other key components of your desires or your behaviors or your needs or your emotions. We're basically supposed to be at war with ourselves. Right? We're supposed to suppress entire parts of ourselves because they don't fit into those binary and oppositional frameworks.
But see, and that's exactly right. And that's where we're supposed to exile, right? In the IFS term, or get rid of or shame those negative parts of ourselves. When we look at those negative parts of ourselves, what are they? They're the parts of us that don't fit nicely into
Right.
subjugation.
Right. And
They're the
and they don't
unruly
fit,
parts.
yeah, they don't fit nicely into the hierarchies, the gendered hierarchies and racialized hierarchies that organize our society. And that's why non-binary people, intersex people, trans people, queer people, that's why they're so destabilizing to the right? It's that they refuse to conform to the gender binaries that sustain the hierarchies.
So I'm going to ask you an impossible question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you and I, who feel very aligned with what you're saying, how do we spread hope? What is the answer to all this? Having the conversation, I hope, and the
Yeah,
writing, that's we believe in that.
that's
But
right.
is there because there's a part of me too. My wife and I have been watching documentaries,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know why. I don't know why, but I'm fascinated by like this new kind of documentary. They have this documentary style. I think it's on Netflix where it's like there's 3 episodes, so it's
Mm-hmm.
like 3 hours, three
Right.
hours.
Short series and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's a lot on cults.
yes.
And
Oh
it's like
yeah.
there's so much. I mean, we could probably talk for hours on addictions and cults.
Yes.
But so much of the society is kind of on the addiction of money and
Yeah.
the cult and everything you're saying is like it feels like there's people just getting swept up into like this cult-like thinking.
So do you know Danielle? I want to make sure I pronounce her last name properly. Danielle Mazurek Young. She was raised in the Children of God cult, and she got out of it when she was 16, and she then joined the military, American military, in large part to fund her education. But Daniela wrote a book called Uncultured that I highly recommend.
I'm gonna get it.
The
Okay. Yeah.
first half is about the Children of God cult, which was a child sex trafficking ring ultimately, and she survived that and escaped, and then she joined the military. And when she left the military, she then pursued a degree in the study of cults, which she got from Harvard University. And in this book, she clearly defines what a cult is, and then she shows how Children of God and the military are both cults.
Oh,
And
wow.
she breaks down why that is. So I thought maybe you would be interested in that.
Very much so. Yes.
We have
Yeah.
met, like we met because she was actually, I didn't know this, but she was reading my first book, Rage Becomes Her, out loud in TikTok. And she
Oh,
would
wow.
read a portion. She knits in the morning and she reads. And that's how I found her. And I reached out to her. And anyway, so we met in person
That's
and
great.
really hit it off. And she is remarkably resilient, and I also say in the book, I'm not trying to knock people's resilience. I'm a cultural critic. So what I'm saying is we need to
Yeah. Yeah.
understand, and this is part of the cognitive flexibility. We need to understand limits. We need to understand why it's important to change. We need to understand grit, but we need to understand why we have to stop sometimes and why persevering is more
Yes.
damaging. Like there are all of these things. And part of the ideology of the country is that it's a country built on limitlessness. We focus a lot on freedom, but in fact, the underlying mechanism of that freedom, in order for the freedom to be valid, is limitlessness. It
So,
is,
so when you say limitlessness,
yeah.
and I had this great conversation with C. Sykes in the IFS world,
Mm-hmm.
what I think of in my system is addiction.
Yeah,
It
that's
comes
true. I
to
didn't think of that. That's exactly right.
it comes to addictions where the society or the white male
Mm-hmm.
that thus runs it with the billions of dollars
Yeah.
define what are the good addictions and what are the bad
What are the
addictions. And
bad addictions?
we'll shame the bad addictions, and
Mm-hmm.
they're harmful, they're hurtful, but so are the good addictions. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're addicted to money, if you're addicted to power,
Yes. And there
there's
are no
nothing wrong with
limits.
that addiction, right?
That's right. And, the whole idea, for example, of westward expansion and manifest destiny, in order to believe those things, you have to erase indigenous history. You have to erase slavery. You have to believe that the land was empty. You have to believe that the people who were there were not really people, or that they're still gone. Like you have to stop thinking.
Yes, you're totally right. There has to be some sort of dissociation.
Yes, you have to detach. You have to detach, right? And so
Yeah.
I would say that, in the book, I talk about disconnection, but I actually think the word disassociation is better. If I were to write it now, having heard you say that, I'm like, oh, there were many times when I said disconnection, when I should have said disassociation, because it's a richer way to describe it. But it's repetitive. Like throughout our lives, we're socialized to disassociate, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
I think a lot about I write a lot about gendered resilience because we have different resilience ideals for men and women. And to your point about our being masculine and feminine, all of us, right? We all have these characteristics. Everyone has them. And to the degree that we stop having them is the degree to which we are conforming. So,
Hmm.
right? Like that to me is a straight equation. But like my brother and I, 2 years apart, tied at the hip, best friends. And there just came a point in our young lives when the society couldn't tolerate that. We had to be different, right?
Hmm.
Like he had to be a boy and I had to be a girl. And that meant we had to disassociate ourselves from our commonalities, right? And that's a microcosm of what happens to all of us, right? We have to, it's like I also write about white supremacy in my own family. I like to have Black ancestors endangered people in my family. So they renounced that, right? Like you have to kind of say, no, we're not. We're actually not.
Would you say that's like internalized racism almost?
Absolutely. Well, it's internalized racism, but it's also colorism, and it's also in a colonial. I grew up in a colonial country. It was still a colony when I was growing up, the Bahamas.
Wow. Wow.
So the real and abiding danger that comes with being a Black person in America, for example, and my family was not in America, meant that many people chose to pass, right? They renounced their families and they lived in entirely white worlds. And how's that for disassociation, right?
Oh,
Like,
God. And
it's
trauma.
very
Yeah.
profound. It's just a horrible thing for everybody involved.
Well, and again, going back to cults, it's like this inherent need that I think all of us have to feel attached to others, to feel attached to the
Mm-hmm.
group. So now you
Belonging.
have a belonging, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you have like who you perceive as the group
Mm-hmm.
telling you in order to join us, you have to dissociate from parts of yourself.
That's right.
You're in
You
an
have to
impossible
shed those
situation
parts.
right there.
That's right. That's right. You have to shed those parts of yourself or denigrate them or hold self-contempt.
And then we're left in a state which we are now where, you know, we desperately need um, mental health because our mental healths are eroding in this
Mhm.
kind of world where I think a lot of us are feeling disoriented and unattached to something. It's hard to feel attached at times in this world. There's a lot of loneliness.
Yeah, there's a lot of loneliness, and I would say that that loneliness is a symptom of the destruction of social trust, right? Like we think of loneliness in
Absolutely.
individual terms. We think, well, that person's lonely. What are we going to do for that person? How can that person be helped? How can that person connect? But there is the truth that societies, particularly democracies, they need social trust. We need to trust each other, and people's faith in each other, faith in our institutions, faith in democracy.
I think one thing that I struggle with is within my field of psychology, kind of the forces that you're talking about, it's not immune from that. And there's definitely been books written on like the colonialization of psychology and
Yes, yes,
how it's based on the medical model.
absolutely. And it's a very Western individualistic model. Yeah.
Right. And you said this, which I thought was beautiful when you were talking about trauma, that we, when you look at different people,
Hmm.
the word has gotten so watered down where it
Yeah.
could mean so many different
So
things
many things.
that it loses its uh power in a way.
Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, we use this word. You could have a bad meal. Someone could have a bad meal and say, "Oh my God, I was traumatized by that meal." And that's
I was
not
laughing when you
helpful.
said that
Yeah,
because I was thinking, oh, but we do change the capitalization of trauma
I
and
know,
we
but
do say big T and little t.
that's practitioners who say big T and little t.
Yes.
When you're in social media, those lines are very blurred. As a writer, I have written for a very long time about women's reproductive justice and rights. We know, like, this is not a new conversation. If you don't know the harms to women and families and society of denying women an abortion, it's because you don't want to know. And also, we're talking about women, but the fact is that as children, boys are as vulnerable to sexual molestation as girls until about the age of 10. And one of the biggest myths that is sustained about rape is that boys and men can't be raped. It wasn't until like
Mm.
2011 that the FBI changed its definition of rape to admit that boys and men could be raped. 2011, right?
Wow.
And
Wow.
so the issues of autonomy and freedom and rights that make up reproductive justice demands clearly apply to everybody, right? This is why, when we talk about childbirth, there are people who gestate and give birth who aren't women. And that's really hard for people to put together in their brains, right? They're like, but wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. How can that be? That's impossible. And that, again, to me, is a matter of resisting change, resisting difference, resisting the fact that your way is not the only way, that we live in a pluralistic, diverse society, that many cultures around the world have different ways of understanding gender. Like, there's just such a huge world for us to consider. And yet we're stuck fighting this rearguard action against this very powerful worldview.
It feels at times like some of us are stuck on we have our own beliefs and our mission is to spread those beliefs to everybody on this planet.
And dominate them. This is the thing. It's really like, it's one thing to spread your beliefs in the interest of spreading democracy, right? But if you look at the history of the 20th century, it hasn't simply been a matter of spreading democracy, right? It's capitalism, it's domination, it's exploitation. I mean, everything's complicated. There's nothing, like, you have to really be okay with the complexity of things. Um, and I understand the urge to oversimplify things because it's it's a relief. It's a psychic relief to do
Absolutely.
that.
And it's quick. It's
And it's
quick
quick
and
and it's simple. And But that's not really how the world works. So again, it's to me the difference in this case between the unhinged optimism of the simplicity in the end and the strategic pessimism of trying to grapple with the complexity, you know? Because you have to be strategically pessimistic. You have to say resilience is great, but in fact, maybe they're not great things we need to talk about. You know, like you have to be able to shift from one to the other state.
Yes, yes, 100%. You need to be flexible and you can't dissociate from the truth,
That's
which
right.
I think a lot of times that happens. Um,
That's right.
I guess I want to lean into the question because I really admire you
Oh, thank
and
you.
your energy and all the things you're saying. And I feel like kind of meeting you, like there's a hopefulness. Like you're not just like this bitter person that's like, screw the
Yes.
world, I hate it. You're like,
Yeah.
there's hopeful. What helps you to hold on to that hope?
Oh, that's a good question. You asked this question before, like, what can we do? And I think two things. One is it's been very important for me over the past few years, during which I felt very despondent, right? Like a lot of despondency. Um, but what was really helpful to me was because I have a good community, knowing that it's okay to take turns. You know, when I'm feeling particularly low, I can turn to people and say, I'm feeling particularly low. And it's like a
Mm.
baton, right? I'm like, I have a lot of energy. I'll do a lot. And we just take turns. I'm like, okay, I really need to step back. Like, I have to get myself sorted out here because this is not healthy. It's not good for anybody around me. It's hard, right? Because so many of the things we're dealing with are ugly and dark and scary and hopeless feeling. But in fact, as my husband says, to do this work, you like he's particularly talking about feminist work, I think, because that's the focus of my work. But he said you have to be a daily pessimist, but an eternal optimist. The thing that keeps you going is that you believe you have hope that things can change and that you can be part of that change. And
So,
as long,
so
yeah,
I love that. How is that for complexity?
I mean, I think it's true because you have to acknowledge, like, you
I
have to
agree.
deal with the bad things. You have to say, okay, these things are not working for us. So what has to happen for them to work? You know, and that pessimism is what allows us to plan, to be activists, to build coalitions, to act in solidarity. Like that's what that is. You know, if you were just optimistic, you wouldn't take action. You'd be like, no, we're good. I'm stopping here. You know, I think we're fine. You know, everything will work out. I'm just not, you know, like for me personally, I'm like, no, I don't think so.
Oh my God. What's going on inside of me is like, God forbid that day
I'm like, no,
happens.
I can't think that, you know?
Well, and
So
then if that were to happen, at that moment, we lose our authentic voice in all of this.
you disassociate,
You
right?
disassociate. That's right. That's the theme of this talk. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And we have to close, I know, but I remember 2011, 12, 13, 15. I really tried to have a meeting of minds with friends that were conservatives or Republicans. And, you know, 25 years ago, those relationships were much easier. There was
Mm.
just this kind of, you didn't really talk about a lot of things. And between like 2010 and 2015, I really tried. And what I noticed was that a lot of people that I spoke to who couldn't see the threat represented by backlash and Trump's rise, they literally denied that it was a threat. They'll never do what they say. It's just talk. And it was that minimization and denial was in fact disassociation because it was like, it's not going to touch me. I don't have to deal with it. Like I'm gonna keep it at bay.
Right.
Um, and I think that's what people do, and because it's identity protective, you know.
But what I don't understand in that, and I think you're right, is that now when Trump says, like, if I'm elected or when I'm elected, I'm going to be a dictator in so many words, and people are okay with that.
Well,
They'll
I mean,
say
that's a
that.
whole other issue. Like if you look at, you know, if you look at the study of authoritarianism, as a, just people who study that,
Yeah.
there's an incredibly high percentage of people of every population who have authoritarian mindsets and will support dictators. It's like 38%.
Oh,
And that's consistent across cultures, and
interesting.
very
Interesting.
interesting. And so, if you look at Trump supporters, there's roughly between 38 and 42% of people who are like, no, he's my guy, I'm not changing my mind. That's like an unmoving number. And strong men, capital S, capital M,
Hmm.
they exist for a reason. And it's because many people desire that in a leader, and um, that's hard. That's hard to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah.
But strongmen really, if we had social trust, if we didn't live in a time of polycrisis, if we didn't feel like the world was fraying at the seams, people's support and desire for strongmen wouldn't be as strong. Like it's like strongmen create the circumstances for their own support by reaping chaos and division and dissension and cultivating fear, and that just elicits these very strong emotional responses in people.
That's so fascinating. I mean, the psychology behind it is fascinating.
The psychology behind it really is. I just love when people say women are more emotional. This entire right-wing movement is a reactionary response among mainly men to status anxiety or whatever. Pick your emotional response.
Yeah.
So much. Well, read the
Yeah.
book and you'll see what I say.
I promise you, I absolutely will. I'm going to buy it
Yeah.
now. Thank
But
you for,
thank you so much
I
for having
got
me
a new
today.
friend.
I know, I know.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Empowered Through Compassion. If you're looking for support on your own healing journey, we'd love to hear from you. My wife and I are both licensed social workers in Massachusetts, and together we co-founded Empowered Through Compassion to offer grounded, compassionate space for therapy, supervision, and trauma-informed couples work. You can learn more about what we offer on our website, www.empoweredthroughcompassion.com.